Hi, everybody. This is Alex from the Astro Imaging channel. Welcome back to another Sunday night. Tonight, we've got one of those really cool stories. Greg Benecke from Southern California here is going to tell us a little bit about the things he's learned about astro imaging since he started his adventure, the kinds of things that he's done, some mistakes he's made, and how he fixed those mistakes and things like that. This kind of show has always been pretty popular on the Astro Imaging channel. A lot of people like to watch it. And we hope you enjoy it tonight. Please get on over to the YouTube comments section and click over there. And if you've got any questions for Greg, or if you've got anything that you'd like to know about in astro imaging, please put your comments in there. I want to tell you that the Astro Imaging channel does run on volunteers, and we've got a good set of volunteers, and um, we we like to have you volunteer. We need people like Greg tonight. Come along and help us a little bit with. He's doing a presentation. I first saw this presentation at Nightfall a year ago, and I asked him to bring it on to the Astro Imaging channel. One of the things that happened this week on the Astro Imaging channel that we should tell you about is that some horrible evildoer, I might mention, got into our website somehow and did whatever magic they do, the evil deeds that they do, and they hacked it. And Adam had to spend a long time trying to fix it. And together, between Adam and the provider and stuff like that, we did get it managed to work again. However, you probably know that for some time our URL has been testing.theastroimagingchannel.com. But you could go ahead and get onto the website by just putting on theastroimagingchannel.com. Well, it looks like if you continue going to theastroimagingchannel.com without the testing, you may wind up getting sold some strange medicine from a strange pharmacy someplace. So be very careful with that. In other recent developments on the Astro Imaging channel, I want to remind you that there is a place for you to comment over in the YouTube feed. And on the YouTube feed, you'll see several things that you need to look into. One of them is about how to donate to the organization. We are going to be at the end of the year, so we've got some bills coming up to pay for the website and stuff like that. And we'd appreciate if you can help us with that. You can also see the place where you can subscribe to the YouTube channel. And subscribing to the YouTube channel is pretty important to us. If you're a regular listener, or even if you're not a regular listener, we'd like you to subscribe, because if you can subscribe to the Astro Imaging channel, then we have more tools available to us in YouTube that'll help us analyze how we're doing and what we need to do and things like that. Okay, enough of the announcements and stuff like that. And I think, Greg, are you awake over there?
Yes, I
It's
am.
about time for you to tell us all the stuff that you've been on your little trek in astro imaging. Tell us what you've learned.
Okay, so now let's see. I gotta get into presentation mode here on my PowerPoint. And are you seeing that, or are you just? Do you see my first slide there?
Not yet, Greg.
Okay, so Alex, remind me what I need to do here to share.
Okay. Remember up at the three dots in the upper right-hand corner?
Right. Okay.
And click on them.
And then it's share screen.
And it'll ask you to share screen up at the top.
Right.
And so when you click on that, you'll get the white mini screen, the little window in the middle. Right. And then you click on your screen, and then the blue share button will activate.
Okay.
Click on the blue share button, and then from that point on, we should see your presentation. Right now, it's got me on it.
Okay. How about
your presentation? It looks like.
There you go.
Okay, we good? We good, Tolga?
Yes, we are. We're good.
Okay, good. Go ahead, Greg.
Away we go. So most of you don't know who I am, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself here. I started in visual astronomy in 1998 when Hale Bopp was around, and I joined a local club, the South Bay Astronomical Society. Shortly after that, I purchased the Celestron C8 Deluxe, and a few years later added a 15-inch Dob and a selection of Naglers. I unsuccessfully dabbled a couple of times with film astrophotography and the C8 with an off-axis guider after a friend sold me a S-Big ST4 cheap. And I finally took the plunge to real astrophotography in 2007. I purchased a Lost Manny G11, a William Optics Megres 90, Hutech modified Canon XTI, and Imaging Plus for my capture and processing software. So I mounted the Megres 90 on the C8 piggyback on the G11 and guided with the ST4. And that was my first shot I took, so I was pretty happy for the first time out. Of course, you can't stick with what you originally purchased. After a while, I found a Nightscape 8300 one-shot color camera cheap at a swap meet. More recently, I moved to a KHY10 one-shot color camera. I dabbled in monochrome and narrowband using ST8 with no results worth mentioning, so I'm not a narrowbander or a monochrome imager. I'm just a one-shot color imager. Additional scopes I've used for imaging are William Optics Zenithstar 66SD, two different 8-inch f4 Newtonians, and a Celestron HD 1100 with the f7 reducer. And I've, in the last few years, I bought an Astrophysics 1100 GTO and put the absolute encoder option on it a while ago. Okay, so let's talk about what people want to mount. I know a lot of people know this already, but some people it may be new, so we'll go through everything here. What do you want to mount? Well, you want to get adequate weight capacity. So I think the obvious thing to recommend is you get the highest weight capacity mount you can afford right off the bat, because this is the foundation of everything. If the mount can't handle the weight of your rig, then you're not going to do well. So for visual versus imaging loads, lower end and many mid-range mounts can only handle about half their visual capacity when imaging. The high-end mounts are generally specified in their imaging capacity. So if Astrophysics tells you it can handle 110 pounds, it can handle 110 pounds of actual imaging load. I'm sorry. Smooth or periodic error, you want to get this something with a smooth periodic error. That's more important than the magnitude of the periodic error, because fast jumps are hard for guiding to keep up with. So for the same error at the worm, larger wheel gears reduce the resulting angular error seen in tracking. So you want to get a mount with the largest worm wheel as you could possibly get. It's good to have a mount that has the ability to track well past the meridian. That allows for longer imaging sequences without a meridian flip. Meridian flips waste imaging time when the object is at the highest point for the night and at its best. Computer control, of course, nowadays virtually everything is computer controlled, so that's not really a consideration anymore. So the three common types of mounts people use for imaging are a fork mount, a German equatorial mount, and more recently, the center balanced equatorial mount. Where I see the fork mount, its advantages is you may already have one like I did when I started out. Assuming that the imaging camera clears the fork base, you can image from horizon to horizon without a meridian flip. Some of the disadvantages, the forks carry a load that is not balanced and can flex if not beefy enough. Requires the use of a wedge to achieve polar alignment, which usually carries an unbalanced load, and so that can flex as well. And it's hard to balance, especially if you have a piggyback mounted guide scope. Now, of course, some of the super high-end mounts now are fork mounts, but that's a whole nother category than what I'm talking about here. German equatorial mount, advantages are both axes are balanced. It has facilitation of polar alignment is inherent in the design with a polar scope through the RA axis. It may be able to track well past the meridian without a meridian flip. The amount is limited at some declinations to avoid crashing into the pier of tripod. And outside that limitation zone, it can image from horizon to horizon. Disadvantage of a German equatorial course is the need for meridian flip at some declinations. The center balance equatorial mounts, I don't have any personal experience with them, but they claim to have a very high payload capacity at a lower mount weight. I have read that some of them have vibration issues because of flexure of the RA shaft with the counterweight hanging off of it there. They do have a limited tracking range past the meridian, which will require a meridian flip eventually. Okay, so I use field flatteners, of course, with my refractor. The majority of telescopes types do not inherently have flat fields, i.e. they don't come into a focus in a plane. Some expensive astrographs do have built-in corrective optics or exotic designs may have inherently flat fields. For refractors, field flatteners, a combination field flattener focal reducer saves the day. And the result is a sharp focus across the sensor, at least in theory. So here's an example of my Megres 90 field curvature without a field flattener. This was done using CCD, the name escapes me now. Anyway, I'll be talking about that later. CCD Ware, I think it is. That's the company. Anyway,
CCD Inspector, probably.
CCD Inspector, yes. Thank you, Alex. Anyway, you can see that the field is nowhere near flat in this 3D rendering here. And with a field flattener, you can see that the field is way flatter. Basically, the size of the stars in the center are not much tighter than the stars in the corner. But nothing is free, of course. While the field is significantly flattened, 40.7% curvature as opposed to 15.9, according to CCD Inspector. But the focal reducer field flattener does add some aberrations of its own. The full width half max of the central image suffered some. It was 2.9 arc seconds without the field flattener and 5.25 arc seconds with it. And the corners do benefit, of course. Let me take a sip here. The corners benefit. It went from 8.57 arc seconds to 6.61 arc seconds. So they're not perfect, but they do give you a more consistent image across, or focus across the image. So what did I do for a camera? Initially, 12 years ago, of course, dedicated cool astronomical cameras were pretty expensive. They were available, of course, in either monochrome or one-shot color. Full frame DSLRs are also pretty pricey. APS size DSLRs were reasonably priced, so I went with that. You could, of course, take the stock filter out that blocks the hydrogen alpha line and put in extended bandwidth filters to be able to get hydrogen alpha. And I chose a Canon Rebel XTI with a Hotech filter modification, APS-C size sensor with 10 megapixels and 5.7 micron pixels. So what are the trade-offs of a DSLR? They're only available as a one-shot color, so it's not really suitable for narrowband imaging, as I'll discuss later. I guess there is a company that does take some color sensors and literally sand off the Bayer matrix, but I don't think that's too good of an idea. No way to stabilize the sensor temperature. It's not a cooled camera. The raw image files aren't really raw. There is some processing that DSLRs do, so it's not a perfectly raw image, which is not the best thing for processing. Uh, mine had limited bit depth. It was only 12 bits, even though a lot of the DSLRs now are 14 bits, and while most cool cameras are 16 bits. So what did I do for guiding? As I mentioned, my first auto guider was the S-Big ST4. That was the first commercially viable self-contained guiding system. It had a tiny 165 by 192 pixel sensor. There was no display for the image. It had a digital readout that provided X and Y location and intensity of the brightest pixel in the sensor array. It was difficult to find a guide star, so I used a flip mirror, which you could find the star in the eyepiece, and then it would be on your chip. And I used it in piggyback, so imaging through one scope and guiding through the other. Here's a picture of the control panel of the ST4, and you can see the brightness value and X and Y position there, and it was not really that fun to use, but once you got a star, it worked pretty good. And so there I am with my first astrophotography rig. So then later on, PhD guiding came out, and that was nice because that allowed you to use either a modified webcam or the webcam-like Astro cameras that were available for guiding. PhD guiding displayed the guide camera image, which got rid of the need for a flip mirror. I picked up a used Meade DSi Pro monochrome camera to use as a guide camera and retired the ST4. It had rectangular pixels, which can confuse the auto guiding software. If you don't square up the pixels, like if you rotated it 45 degrees from the RA and deck axes, PhD will think that it's not guiding properly and give you an error. Anyway, you can get a DSi Pro cheap nowadays for around 50 bucks. So it still works as a guide camera, but there are better guide cameras out there. I tried to use an Orion Starshoot G3 cooled monochrome camera because it has superior noise performance being cooled, but it used up more back focus than I was able to accommodate. I like that camera because you could watch as it cooled, the noise just kind of go away, and it really made for a nice background for your guide stars. Since then, I moved on to the QHY 5L2M. It's an eyepiece size camera with a 1 1/4 inch barrel, has nice high quantum efficiency, low noise, and uses up very little back focus. So, of course, like everybody imaging with a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope, I experienced mirror shift. And for those of you who aren't aware of that, SETs have a mirror that slides along the baffle tube in order to focus. Due to mechanical tolerances, this allows the alignment of the mirror to shift very slightly as the mount moves the scope through the sky. In a piggyback system, the camera looking through the refractor doesn't see the resulting change in image position that the camera on the SET sees. I was able to reduce that by regreasing the baffle tube with Dow Corning high vacuum grease. I caution if anybody does that, you don't want to get that on your optics. It's hard to get off. But I've now got a Celestron Edge HD, and it has a nice effective mirror lock that solves this issue. There's a shot or a diagram of a Schmidt-Cassegrain, and you can see the baffle tube that the mirror slides on. It doesn't take much shift to be noticed. So this is what you would see if you stacked an unaligned stack of subframes in a system with mirror shift. You can see that there's a continuous motion through the various images, and it was not too bad. Fortunately, that's the same set of frames stacked after they were aligned, so if it's not too bad, you can still align things out of it. But you'll see other artifacts like if you don't get a hot pixel out, you'll see an arc of a hot pixel in the aligned stack, because now that hot pixel was moving in your aligned set throughout the night. Anyway, so the cure for that for me was to get another scope. So I bought that when I got the William Optics 66 SD. So then, realizing that I don't have a cool camera, I decided the only way, well, let's see, not being cool, DSLRs exhibit noise that increases with ambient temperature. The noise also increases as the sensor heats up during operation. And increasing exposure time to get a deeper image also allows the sensor's dark signal to increase. So the alternative to longer exposures is a faster telescope to gather more light in the same exposure time. The cure again for me was another scope. I got myself a Vixen R200 SS 8-inch f4 Newtonian, and that provided just shy of a full stop of increase in speed over my Megrez 90 at a little longer focal length of 800 millimeters. So there's the Vixen with the Megrez mounted on top of it for guiding. So, of course, one of the things that comes with a Newtonian is coma. Newtonian telescopes can only form a pinpoint image at the optical center of the image. The light rays of an off-axis image spread out more the further off the axis they are in a comet-like pattern called coma. Coma is worse the faster the scope is, leaving not much of a usable image area in an f4 scope. So similar to field flatteners, coma correctors are available to combat that problem. So you want to make sure you use your coma corrector correctly. I've used 3 different coma correctors over the years. The Bader MPCC Multi-Purpose Coma Corrector Mark II, which was optimized for f4.5 to f6. The Bader Row Coma Corrector, which is optimized for f3.5 to f6, and the Bader MPCC Mark III, optimized for f3.5 to f6. You gotta make sure that you set the spacing correctly. It's 55 millimeters for both MPCCs. I note that the Mark III, and that's the reason I bought it, had provisions to work with the Orion fin-off axis guider and get the correct spacing easily. And for the row coma corrector, it has a very long back focus of 91.5 millimeters. So it allows you to use a longer, thicker off-axis guider or even a filter wheel for monochrome sensors. Coma correctors are extremely sensitive to tilt, collimation, and centering errors. Even using a Barlow laser collimator doesn't ensure symmetrical star shapes in the corner. So alignment is critical on these things. Of course, there's software to help with this, and more on that later. As with field flatteners and focal reducers, the central image will suffer some. The RCC row coma corrector is a 3-element design that does better in this regard than the 2-element MPCC family. And then more recently, since I wrote this, I've actually gotten an ES Explore Scientific high-resolution coma corrector, which is a 4-element design. I haven't tested it yet, but I suspect it will even be better than the row coma corrector. But all is still not well. While guiding with a refractor vastly improved the guiding over the mirror shift of the C8, some shift was still found. The imaging rig at the time was the R200SS as the imaging scope with the Megrez 90 as the guide scope. Between the focusers and the attachment of the 2 scopes, there was still some flexure. I was experiencing the dreaded differential flexure. The largest contributor was found to be the long cantilever load of the guide camera, causing the focuser to sag. So I added an additional supporting scope ring around the guide camera to reduce the total flexure. So you can see there's a ring on around the guide camera there. And that pretty much got rid of the problem. But Ultimately, the real solution for flexure, I believe, is off-axis guiding. Piggyback guiding is fraught with multiple potential sources of differential flexure. An off-axis guider uses a pick-off mirror in the optical path of the imaging camera to bounce the image of a guide star to the guide camera. It eliminates the sources of differential flexure. It automatically compensates for mirror shift and SCTs. So I recommend bypassing piggyback guiding completely and going with an off-axis guider from the onset. So there's a picture of an off-axis guider in one use.
Greg, a moment, please. Could you
Sure.
flip back to the picture of the and point out the flip mirror a couple of slides ago?
Oh. Well, okay. This was still with a flip mirror here, wasn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a flip mirror. Can you see my cursor there?
I can't see your cursor.
Okay. I guess that doesn't get
That box that says mead on it.
right.
You have to understand. There are those of us who've been doing this long enough that we kind of know what the we know what a flip mirror is, and we had to use it, and even to guide with and find guide stars and stuff like that. But there are an awful lot of our audience that don't realize that once upon a time there was a mirror, this flip mirror, and you turn this little dial here, that gray dial just above the M in Mead, and it would flip another mirror up and down so that you could focus and find your targets and stuff like that. This was long before a lot of other cool things were happening. I don't think I've seen a flip mirror around for a long time. I just
Yeah.
thought I'd tell people for historical purposes.
Yeah. So the guide camera on that picture is that ST4. So
Yeah.
that's why the flip mirror was in use there.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Some of the additional benefits of off-axis guiding. Eliminating the guide scope reduces the amount of counterweight needed for balance. The elimination of the mass of the guide scope and associated counterweight reduces the angular momentum of the assembly, and this improves the response to guiding and reduces settling time to disturbances like wind and things like that. Allows greater payload capacity for the actual imaging package or use of a lower percentage of the mount's weight rating. Okay, so I'm sure most of us do this. I've definitely learned once I started doing it that you always want to flat field your images. Flat field is an image of an evenly illuminated target. Processing software uses this to apply corrections to the astronomical image to compensate for light loss anywhere in the image due to obstructions or dust and dirt in the optics. And I should have mentioned vignetting in there too. Anyway, flat field must be taken with an undisturbed optical train. You only have the exact alignment of all the obstructions and dust and things at one time. So here's a contour plot of a flat field, and you can see it's brightest in the center and the light drops off towards the periphery. So here's an image that was processed without flat fielding, and you can see after the big stretch that the corners are totally dark and there's a bright spot in the center. Here's the same image with flat fielding, and you can see it's much better field illumination throughout. Okay, so I learned the hard way that there's one way to get cheap insurance to save connectors on cameras. Cable routing is always an issue. You don't want to have heavy and stiff cables applying pressure to the imaging train. You don't want to have the possibility of a snagged or pinched cable as the mount tracks through the night or when slewing between targets. I literally tore a connector out of a camera and opened up the insulation on cameras due to various problems with this. So I decided to use pigtails. You can get short little cables, 6 to 12 inch USB cables, and all varieties of AB, male, female, full size, mini, micro. And I put these at the camera and plug in an appropriate long cable that goes to the USB hub or computer. Excuse me. So if you snag a cable, the idea is that it will pull the long cable from the short cable and hopefully save your camera's connector. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that I didn't think that DSLRs are really appropriate for narrowband. You can get narrowband filters that clip into the mirror box of APS-C size Canon cameras, and I see them now for full-size Canon cameras, and they may even have them for Nikon, I don't know. So this tempted me to try hydrogen alpha imaging with my XTI. So I purchased the 7 nanometer filter, since I'd be fighting LA's bright light pollution here. While it was effective at blocking the light pollution and allowing me to collect hydrogen alpha shots, I think the fallacy of using a one-shot camera for narrowband imaging became clear during processing. Due to the Bayer color filter matrix used on color cameras, fully 3/4 of the image sensor is not being used. So here's a picture of the Bayer matrix. It's an array of red, green, and blue filters over the sensor. Only 1 of every 4 pixels is red. So 3/4 of the narrowband light is lost. And resolution is at best half of the sensor. And anything that falls on the green or blue pixels is just completely lost. It works, but I don't know if you can tell on your screens. This is a very grainy looking image. Whereas if it had been a monochrome sensor with that, it would have been a much more detailed image. Okay, so then once I got my Vixen R200 SS, I started finding that I was getting square stars, and I actually was sensitized to this by oh geez, now his name is escaping, the guy who wrote PhD Guiding originally. Anyway, he had an R200 SS, and he used to comment on his square stars, and that sensitized me to it. And so the solution for square stars, well, let's talk about why they were square first. So the problem was too much diffraction. The spider veins on the Vixen R200 SS are very thick. You can see in that diagram. I didn't have a picture of it, but I pulled it from their website, a diagram. And those spider veins are literally 1/4, 3/8 of an inch thick, pretty thick spider veins. So on bright stars, the diffraction caused the stars to look square. So I replaced the Vixen with a Telescope Services 8-inch f4. It has 1/2 millimeter thick veins, and I get nice round stars now. But diffraction can also be your friend. Finding the best focus is not always easy. Seeing effects cause variations from frame to frame for short exposures. Manual techniques, for me, never seem to converge very well. Motorized focusers coupled with software can use various techniques to average the errors out and find a pretty good focus, but it can be slow. The button-off mask makes use of diffraction to display the point of best focus independent of seeing. So here's a picture of a button-off mask and the diffraction pattern it causes as you move through focus. And you can see as it passes through best focus there, it becomes an X with a bar through it that's perfectly centered. And so what you're trying to do is focus to achieve that perfect pattern. And I can show it in still here. So on the left, you see on one side of focus, you see the bar is just slightly off center. On the right, it's on the other side of focus. It's off to the other side. And in the middle, it's perfectly centered. And that shows you have the best focus. And it's nice that that's seeing independent. It really makes it easy to focus. So I focus in just a minute or two by using a manual focuser on my HD 1100 and a button-off mask, and I get excellent focus. But you want to keep that focus. So aluminum and steel tubes shrink and result in significant focus shifts as the temperature drops through the night. I believe aluminum is worse than steel, if I'm not mistaken. And if you got an SCT, that magnifies the effect of the thermal contraction through the approximately 5 times focal length amplification of the primary by the secondary. So carbon fiber tubes can dramatically reduce the amount of contraction. And I changed the tube on my Celestron HD1100 to carbon fiber, and I can go for much longer periods of time without refocusing. I will caution, though, that that does bring in some other considerations. The carbon fiber tubes don't cool as well. So I've got some active cooling that I use with a secondary, where you remove the secondary and put a cooler where the secondary goes before I start the day of imaging. And that does a pretty good job of cooling things down, and I don't have too much thermal issues there. So let's talk about software a little bit. I use a number of free and commercial software tools. I started originally with Images Plus, a full package that had image capture and processing software. At the time, it was not able to do some of the things that could be done in Photoshop, but I didn't have Photoshop. I'm sure the capabilities have evolved considerably on Images Plus, but I did move away from it. I think the current price is about $245 for that. Craig Stark, that's the guy I was trying to think of. So Craig Stark put out a couple of different software packages, one free, one inexpensive. Nebulosity is an inexpensive but reasonably good. Well, it's good for image capture and reasonably good for processing. Current version costs about $95. It doesn't do everything the most powerful software can do, but it allows you to do some pretty nice processing. PhD guiding, I'm sure most of us have heard of that. It's a powerful and free guiding software package, so you can push your dummy and be on your way to guiding. PhD 2 is a follow-on package developed by the Open PhD Guiding Project that adds very useful capabilities for drift alignment, guide assistance to get the correct settings for your guiding and things like that. And interfaces with Nebulosity to provide dithering between subframes. So dither. Dither is the random or possibly organized repositioning of the guide star and the guide chip between subframes. It moves the image slightly on the image sensor for each subframe. It prevents hot pixels and other repetitive signals from the image sensor lining up on the same lining up the same on each aligned subframe. It dramatically improves hot pixel rejection, fights color model, and provides for a smoother background. Dither can be used with NASA-developed drizzle processing to recover detailed on undersampled images. Nebulosity has drizzle capability. Hubble dithers, so should you. I believe Hubble dithers in a precisely organized pattern to maximize the efficiency of the drizzle processor. Okay, and of course, most of us have heard of ASCOM. Stands for the Astronomy Common Object Model. The ASCOM initiative is a group of developers and vendors working together to bring vendor and language independent plug and play capability between astronomy software and astronomical instruments on PCs. The ASCOM platform is installed on your PC along with the ASCOM drivers for the device from the device vendors. ASCOM compatible software can then seamlessly control mounts, cameras, focuses, field rotators, dome rotators, etc. ASCOM provides virtual comm support so that multiple applications can communicate to the mount simultaneously, such as guiding, planetarium, and plate solving applications. And there's the website, ascomstandards.org. What I've used for planetarium software, I started out with an early version of Starry Night. Never connected it to the telescope to control it, just use it for sky charts. Then I got Sky 6 cheap when Sky 10 came out, and it still does everything I need. Select objects, through the mount, provide image field of field of view preview. It connects to the mount while guiding is active through ASCOM. No longer available or supported by Software Abyss, so it's the Sky 10 you got to get. And I believe it's about 169 bucks for the Sirius edition and 349 for the Pro version. Okay, plate solving. I use Astrophotography. It's a free open source plate solving software that uses the astrometry.net plate solver engine. Plate solving determines the image's celestial coordinates by calculating the angles in triangles formed by bright stars and comparing them to a database. It can be used to automatically sync the mount to the solved coordinates or to move the mount precisely to a specific location. It can also determine the image scale in arc seconds per pixel and tells you what angle your camera is rotated to. It's a perfect tool for returning to the same image location and orientation for multiple nights of capture on the same object. It can be used for planning and executing mosaics accurately. And there is the web address for it, sourceforge.net/p/astrotortilla/home/home. Okay, then I started using Tempro because it came with my astrophysics mount. Almost every equatorial telescope mount experiences right ascension tracking errors that are periodic to the worm gear cycle. Exceptions are low-end mounts with spur gears that exhibit no periodicity, and very expensive mounts with high precision encoders that use feedback to precisely position the mount in real time to within a fraction of an arc second, resulting in no periodic error. Tempro captures and averages the periodic error over multiple worm cycles and programs the mount with a smooth periodic error correction curve. Like I said, my copy came with my astrophysics mount, and I was able to improve my astrophysics performance from 9 arc seconds peak to peak to around 1 arc second peak to peak. And it's available from CCDware for 150 bucks. You can get a 30-day trial version that only allows you to analyze your periodic error, won't let you write it to the mount. Another CCDware item here, we mentioned earlier, CCD Inspector is a powerful optical performance analysis tool. It provides for out of focus and in focus collimation. It analyzes focal plane flatness, tilt, and centering, analyzes field illumination, and you can set it up to track your seeing and focus over the night. It's the tool that was used to make the field curvature and flat field plots seen earlier in this presentation. Not cheap at 180 bucks, but there's no other software that will do some of the analysis that it does. And I recently bought it to ensure every imaging session had optimally adjusted optics, even though I'll have to admit lately I have not been checking my collimation every time I go out. I should. It's probably the only way to accurately collimate a hyperstar and SET. To me, that's difficult to get the hyperstar right. Anyway, and a full function 30-day trial is also available. CCDware also has other software, CCD Navigator for planning, Focus Match for focusing, CCD Autopilot for automation, CCD Stack for processing. I don't have any of those, but I thought I'd mention them. And I think one of the nicest programs out there, and the one I use currently for all my processing, is PixInsight. After spending quite a few thousands of dollars on equipment, and over 70 trips to dark sites. I had to ask myself, why was I cheaping out on imaging processing software? PixInsight is one of the most advanced dedicated astro imaging processing programs currently available. It's not cheap at 230 euros, which is about 253 bucks today. But it can do things that you might not imagine. And new capabilities are added frequently, and it's developed with the user community. Learning curve is extremely steep, and much of it is not intuitive. But climbing the learning curve is well worth it. It was poorly documented originally, worsening the learning curve, but Warren Keller has come out with the book Insight Pix Insight. Actually, a second edition of that's out now. That is an invaluable resource. His website, IP for AP, has video tutorials that can be purchased, or a subscription is possible to the website. And I highly recommend that if you're using Pix Insight. Adam Block has online Pix Insight tutorials now, and there are actually numerous sources online of Pix Insight material nowadays. So, but it's a very powerful program. However, it will bring your computer to its knees. Pix Insight is extremely math processing intensive. I highly recommend a higher end processor with multiple cores and threads and lots of RAM. So I built myself, now this is a couple years ago now, but I built myself a purpose-made computer that at the time used a quad-core 8-thread i7 processor to reduce processing time. Of course, right after I did that, they came out with the i8. I no longer have time for coffee breaks between many of my processing steps. And another thing you want to do is you want to calibrate your monitor. Few monitors have accurate color and grayscale calibration right out of the box. I have a lower end 4K graphics grade monitor that can cover the entire sRGB color space, but not the Adobe RGB color space. Most photographically oriented printers are capable of covering the sRGB color space. Non-graphics oriented monitors generally cannot cover 100% of the sRGB color space. I use a Spider 5 Elite to calibrate my monitors. It provides a much more consistent image appearance when moving between systems. It provides for closer matching of images seen on the monitor to printed images. So what's a color space? Basically, it's the range of colors that something can display, shown in a chart like this. So you can see the smallest triangle there is the sRGB color space. Adobe RGB has more greens and yellows and blues that it can display. And I guess there's this Pro Photo RGB space, which is even bigger, which I don't know what uses that. Anyway, that's what a color space is. And then I had this slide at the end of last year's thing, and I left it in here. I had just found this new program, to me at least, the Astrophotography tool. I was looking for a source of a Bahtinov grabber, which was a program that you could use to analyze the symmetry of that Bahtinov mass pattern to tell you when you had it exactly symmetrical. So Astrophotography tool, from their website, they call it the Swiss Army knife for imaging sessions. It's got tools for planning, collimating, aligning, focusing, framing, controlling, imaging, synchronizing, scheduling, analyzing, and monitoring. It does have the Bahtinov grabber. One thing I thought was kind of interesting is that it had the ability to control 2 cameras at the same time on the same mount and properly interface with the guide program. So you won't have one camera taking an image while the other camera tells the guider to move for dither or something like that. It's a shareware that has an unlimited free trial version and a full version for 18.7 euros. And that's at www.astroplace.net. I'll have to admit, I have not used it in the last year, so I can't really say anything about it. but it might be interesting for some things people might want to do. And I do believe that is my last slide. So here's a recent image, or at least a year ago it was recent, of my HD 1100. And here's one with the Vixen, sorry, not the Vixen, the telescope service 8-inch f4 Newtonian. And that's all I've got.
Well, thank you very much, Greg. Hey, I got a question for you. In your evolution of software applications for processing, you were at PixInsight and then you went to APT. Did APT replace PixInsight, or is it just an additional tool that you use for certain aspects?
No, I actually haven't used APT. It's just a software I found. I know I use PixInsight for all my processing these days.
Okay. Okay. Eric, have you been monitoring over there on the uh, YouTube chat?
Yeah, there's been some questions, most of which have been answered, by Tolga as we go along. Mostly chat between the people on YouTube.
Okay. There have been no comments over in the older chat room that we had over there, which we will probably stop putting on the website at some point soon because it's getting a little silly. Nobody ever goes there because they've done what we wanted them to do, and that is go over to YouTube to make your comments.
I do, Alex.
Yeah.
I do have a little tip for SCT users. I know Greg talked about. It's about the mirror shift. It's not a solution, but it's something that can make life a little bit better. It doesn't solve the problem. So what I've done is when I used to use my SCT, and it pretty much takes care of the mirror shift problem. What you do is that you slew all the way to horizon. Like, let's say you're going to pick it up east and go up to the meridian. You slew the telescope all the way to the horizon, and then just give it a whack, like a light little tap in the back. And what that does is it pre-flips the mirror all the way down, and then you can go all the way up to the meridian without worrying about, not so much. It takes care of it a little bit. But then once you cross the meridian, you have to do it the other way around. You have to go to the western horizon, give it another whack, and go back up.
Wow.
Just a little trip.
Well, thank you for that suggestion, Tolga. There are other things you can do with mirror shift. None of them completely rid you of the problem of mirror shift, I think. So you always have to be careful of that. Some of the things are you can screw pads in from the back of your scope and put an auxiliary focuser on it, and various other things, but you can never because of the construction of the focusing in the standard Schmidt-Cassegrain, you're probably gonna have that problem, and that's why Greg, I think, said, "Hey, you're gonna look into an off-axis guider," or as one of our participants was commenting over there, was about the on-axis guider, which offers other opportunities that we didn't used to have, but Gaston's product is enabled us to do everything else. Tolga, are you reading along with the questions? Where would you tap the telescope when you were?
Oh, the idea is just to shake it. Just you give it you're trying to give it a little vibration. It really doesn't matter. Just on the tube in the back where the black part. I'm not saying hit it with a sledgehammer. You're just trying to make a little vibration to let the mirror settle on the left side. If you're, whatever, not left. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Just let it flip as much as it's going to flip. And then if you slew back up without going to the other side, hopefully it stays that way. It is not a solution. It doesn't solve the problem, just minimizes it.
It pre-shifts.
Correct.
Yeah, it pre-shifts instead of waiting for gravity and everything to shift it gradually, or maybe even let it shift quickly. You pre-shift everything so that there's less to shift. Um, it's a problem. It's just a problem with that focusing design. I see we have some comments coming in. Um, we did have a discussion about getting the people from CCD where please understand that we are trying to do that. We are trying to get them in here. You guys probably don't know, but Tolga especially is very good at this. I do some of it. We go out looking for people to come and speak. And I think you've even heard me say that we need you to come in and speak. For instance, somebody suggested, John at Astra, that he'd like to see a presentation on autofocusing. Boy, there's so much to see about that. Maybe we'll see if we can find somebody. And come on, somebody out there, somebody among you guys know how to, some things that you can tell us about autofocusing. And if you could put together a little PowerPoint over it, I think we'd really enjoy that. I think we're getting close to, Athopi Cuss, I think is how you say that. Once Greg, what's the difference? When you're using your ZWO cam, can you explain how you use your offset?
Well, I've got a QHY camera. The offset, boy, trying to think about when I got that set up originally. The offset's probably the least critical thing. Within a range, the offset value is going to be good. Basically, you just want to have enough offset so that in your processing, when you're subtracting bias with any noise that's with it, that you don't end up with going zero on the count, on the ADU count. And then the gain you want to set to generally so that right where the camera saturates or the sensor saturates, reaches full well. You want the 16-bit range to span that full well. So you got to adjust the gain so that your output maxes out right at the point where you're reaching your full well depth. And I'm not an expert on that. There are discussions on the internet that discuss how to reach the optimum gain and offset on your camera. But that's what you're trying to do, basically.
Okay, thank you.
Craig Stark, Craig Stark has a. If you go to his website, he's got a full how-to on that, how to set the gain on the camera.
Right. He's got information. He's got stuff to tell you how to test your camera, to learn out how linear it is, what its full well capacity is, things like that.
I don't know how far we can get into mirror flop and things like that. It certainly wasn't the main part of the presentation. It's one of those things that you do have to deal with as time goes on. But as Otopicus has pointed out, the Meade LX850 series has a mirror lock. Yeah, you can get mirror locks. What mirror locks do is they lock the position of the mirror where it is right now. What they don't do is actually lock the mirror. That is, your mirror is riding on a slide that moves up and down or forward and backwards and things like that. And the mirror lock will generally lock the mirror. What it doesn't generally do, and there are differences in the way you can make a mirror lock. What it doesn't do is actually hold the mirror right there. That no matter which way you turn and twist that tube, that mirror stays in exactly the same position relative to the rest of the optics, and that's where you're getting the mirror flop. And is this okay? Then there are some other questions here. Oh, and I think I mentioned it, and several other people have commented on it over in the YouTube comments that the whole idea is that you lock the mirror up as tight as you can in the um, with your mirror locks or whatever it is, and then having set that position, you do the actual focusing with, like, moonlight was suggested by John here, but there are other focusers, auxiliary focusers that are mounted on the back of the SCT that move it back and forth. But But even an auxiliary focuser doesn't solve the problem if, in fact, the mirror is not locked down in the first place. Okay. Um, Nicole Suthar asks, is this a way to avoid flexure in an Edge HD and to lock the thread and guide camera to the focuser of the guide scope? No, the guide scope's got nothing to do with it. The guide scope's got a mind of its own. If you've got a separate guide scope, then your separate guide scope is seeing something besides what your main imaging camera is seeing. If the mirror has flopped, if the mirror has shifted, if the tube itself is flexed, I think we were talking about flex tubes earlier in the comment thread. Uh, if you're using a separate guide scope, it just doesn't see it. They're different. Okay. So, and you can clamp them as tight as you want. It helps, but it doesn't cure it. That's why eventually you go to on axis guiders or off axis guiders in pretty much all but refractors. And refractors are pretty stable. Those optics don't shift around very much, but even then they can shift. Um, that's why they're talking about it. Okay.
You need real beefy focusers for refractors. So there's no mirror or no sag in the focuser.
Yeah, I mentioned a few things about guiding as well. If you're wanting to use a guide scope, you can use a very small guide scope, something like 50 millimeters, and actually graft it right to the OTA. Not in the little rings, because they flex. Anything in rings will flex independent. That's where you're getting issues. So, I used to image with a Vixen a long time ago. I used to use a 50 millimeter guide scope. I made a mechanism out of carbon fiber that had the same curvature as the OTA, and the guide scope was embedded in the carbon fiber, so it was part of the OTA. So those two things did not flex. However, I did get flex because the focusing mechanism would actually move side to side. So flexure is an incredible thing to get rid of. If you can use a very small guide scope on a fairly short focal length, the Vixen's not really long focal length, you can get away with it. But the moment you start getting very long, you do have to go to an off-axis guider.
Yeah, let's not make a mistake here in saying that you can't take a picture with a separate guide scope if
Correct.
you've got an SCT. Don't go there. Okay, that's one of those things you get into. You have to take certain precautions when you do. Let's
Yes.
not overdo um, mirror flopping. People have been mirror flopping forever. And there are probably, when I got into this game, there were probably more pictures taken with the Meade 8-inch SCT than any other images out there. And I'm not sure that isn't probably still true, but you know what I mean? It's still happening out there. So um, don't think we're saying you can't do it. I'm just saying, in general, as many fixes as you can get for these things, many people eventually wind up with an off-axis guider or an on-axis guider to solve the problem. Okay. Now, I think we've run through the list. Bill, you saw my comment there that you should contact us as a contact at the astroimagingchannel.com about that presentation you suggested for some disability. And we can handle it from there. Tolga, me, and Eric will all get that message, and we can tell you, we can get schedule and find out what you want to do and stuff like that. I think we've answered all the questions. I want everybody to get a good night's sleep so they can get their little buns out of bed tomorrow morning and put their solar filters on and see the transit of Mercury. Remember, we wouldn't know how big the universe was if Herrick's and those guys didn't back in 1613 or whatever, do their transits of Mercury to find out how long it actually took to cross the sun. And that's what it was for way back then. And then next Sunday night, you can watch reruns on the Astro Imaging channel because Tolga and Eric and I will be in San Jose or on the way home from San Jose. because of the Astro Imaging Conference. We hope to see some of you there. Please come on up and say hi. We'd like to put faces and names together and stuff like that. When we come back, we've got some programs that I think you'll enjoy. And remember, we do need people making donations. I think Eric has made a couple of notes here about saying that an appreciation for the people who do make donations. We do have some costs, websites and things like that, so we appreciate that. But also, we need to move that number of subscriptions up. So subscribe to the Astro Imaging channel if you can, please. Have I covered everything, Tolga? Have I got everything, Eric? Terry?
Yeah, I think we're good. We can say good night.
Okay, and thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
And take us away, Tolga.
Good night.